Testing. 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 Okay, we're having some technical difficulties. We're gonna take a short break and get the issues resolved, and then we'll be right back. Okay, we're back. Reading the crisis number 1, the lie that nothing can be done. I do not call for revolution. The revolution already happened 250 years ago. What I call for is the defense of what that revolution created. We do not need to overthrow the government. We need to insist that the government follow its own laws. We need to demand that the Constitution be honored by those who swore an oath to it. We need to hold accountable those who have violated that oath, not through violence, but through the mechanisms the founders gave us: protest, petition, the courts, the press, the vote, and the unrelenting pressure of citizens who refuse to accept tyranny. This is not radical. This is the most conservative position possible. It is the insistence that the rules apply to everyone, including the powerful. It is the demand that we be governed by laws and not by men. It is the keeping of the republic. In 5 months, the United States will mark the 250th anniversary of its founding. On July 4th, 2026, we will celebrate, or mourn, the republic that began with a declaration that all men are created equal, endowed with unalienable rights, and entitled to a government that derives its just powers from the consent of the governed. What will we have to show for ourselves on that day? Will we have kept the republic, or will we have watched it fall, telling ourselves there was nothing we could do, waiting for someone else to save it? The answer is not yet written. It is being written now in Minneapolis, in every city where people are showing up, in every act of witness and resistance and solidarity. It is being written by the choices we make in the coming days and weeks and months. Paine wrote 15 more crisis papers after the first one. He kept writing through every setback and every victory for 7 years until the war was won. He understood that the battle was not a single moment, but a sustained commitment. That someone had to keep saying through all of it, "This is worth it. This is who we are. We do not yield." I intend to do the same. This is the first. There will be more as long as the crisis continues. I do not know how it ends. I only know that the keeping of the republic requires that someone keep writing, someone keep speaking, keep insisting, and that I am able to do that, and so I will. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will shrink from the service of their country. But those who stand now, who show up, who speak out, who refuse to look away, deserve the love and thanks of every American who wishes to see the republic survive. What we obtain too cheaply, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives everything its value. The republic was purchased at great cost by those who came before us. The question now is whether we will pay the cost of keeping it. I believe we will. I believe that the American people, when they understand what is at stake, will rise to meet this moment as they have risen before. I believe that the love of liberty is not dead in us, only sleeping, and that it is waking now in Minneapolis and everywhere, that citizens are gathering to say, this far and no further. A republic, if you can keep it. Let us show ourselves and the world and the generations that will follow that we can. And that was notes from The Crisis, number 1, from by Mike Brock, from Notes from the Circus. And now we're going to go to The Crisis, number 2, on the cynical and the craven. I want to tell you about the people who built this. Not the foot soldiers, not the masked agents who shot Alex Preti 10 times in the back while he tried to protect a woman on a Minneapolis street. Those men are instruments. They pulled the triggers, and they will answer for it, but they did not design the machine that put them there. I want to tell you about the architects, the theorists, the men who decided decades ago that the democracy was an obstacle to be overcome, and who have spent the intervening years building the infrastructure to overcome it. This is a story about ideology, about money, about the deliberate construction of a parallel power structure designed to compete with and ultimately replace constitutional government. It is a story about people you may have heard of and others you have not, and what they have been doing while the rest of us were distracted. It is a story about the cynical and the craven, and it ends with blood on their hands. Let us begin with a book. In 1997, William Rees Moog and James Dale Davidson published The Sovereign Individual, Mastering the Transition to the Information Age. The thesis was simple. The Internet would dissolve the power of nation-states. Digital technology would allow the wealthy to escape the constraints of geography, taxation, and democratic accountability. A new era was dawning, an era in which capital would be sovereign, and those who possessed it would owe nothing to the societies that had made their wealth possible. The book painted this as inevitable, deterministic. The logic of technology would produce a world of cognitive elites who operated beyond the reach of governments, while the masses, whom the authors regarded with undisguised contempt, would be left to fight over the scraps of the old order. This was not presented as a dystopia. It was presented as liberation. Liberation for the strong, for the smart, for those who understood where history was going and positioned themselves accordingly. The sovereign individual became a founding text of what would later call itself the technology elite. Peter Thiel has cited it as one of the most important books he has ever read. It circulates in Silicon Valley like scripture. It told a generation of wealthy men that their wealth entitled them to exit, to leave behind the obligations of citizenship and build something new, something better, something for themselves. Exit. That is the key word. That is what they want. Not exit as in immigration, not exit as in leaving one country for another. Exit as in departure from the very concept of democratic constraint. Exit from the principle that the people have any right to govern themselves. Exit from the idea that wealth carries obligations. Exit from the social contract itself. They have built an entire ideology around this word. They call it the right of exit. They mean the right of capital to escape accountability. The right of the powerful to refuse the claims of their fellow citizens. The right to take the wealth that was generated within a society and remove it from that society's reach, while continuing to benefit from the infrastructure, the educated workforce, the legal systems, and the military protection that society provides. They dress it up in the language of freedom, but it is not freedom. It is feudalism. It is the construction of a world in which those with capital rule and those without capital serve, and there is no mechanism by which the ruled can constrain the rulers. They call themselves libertarians, anarcho-capitalists, proponents of network states and competitive government. But strip away the jargon and you find something very old. You find the belief that the strong should dominate the weak, that the rich should rule the poor, that democracy is a mistake and the sooner it is dispensed with, the better. You find fascism with a software update. The intellectual architecture runs deep. Murray Rothbard, the economist who argued that the state itself was illegitimate, that taxation was theft, that public services were tyranny, that the only legitimate social order was one in which property owners exercised absolute dominion over their domains. His work is foundational to the anarcho-capitalist movement. Hans Hermann Hope, Rothbard's student who went further, who argued that democracy was incompatible with liberty, who advocated for a return to monarchy, or better yet, to a world of private covenant communities where property owners would exclude anyone they wished and enforce any rules they chose. A world of small dictatorships sanitized with the language of contract. Carl Schmitt, the Nazi legal theorist who argued that the essence of politics was the distinction between friend and enemy, and that the sovereign was whoever could declare the exception, whoever could suspend the normal rules and impose their will by force. Smith's ideas have found new life among the tech right, who see in his work a justification for the kind of power they wish to wield. These are the thinkers. These are the men whose ideas circulate in the group chats and the private dinners and the conferences where the future is planned. You have not heard of most of them. That is by design. The architecture is meant to be invisible. The buildings are meant to look like they built themselves. Now let us talk about Balaji Srinivasan. Srinivasan is a former general partner at Andreessen Horowitz, the venture capital firm. He is a former chief technology officer of Coinbase. He is a best-selling author and a prolific social media presence. He is, by any measure, one of the most influential figures in the technology industry. The concept is simple. A network state is a community organized online, bound by shared values and cryptocurrency that eventually acquires physical territory and seeks diplomatic recognition as a sovereign entity. It is, in other words, a mechanism for the wealthy to build their own countries, countries where they set the rules, where democracy does not apply, where the only franchise belongs to those who hold the tokens. Srinivasan has written a book about this. He runs boot camps to train people in building network states. He has, according to people I trust, people who know him personally, renounced his American citizenship and relocated to Singapore, from which he conducts these operations. I am told that members of DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk's operation inside the federal government, have attended these boot camps. I do not know all the details, but I know enough to understand what is happening. A parallel structure is being built, an infrastructure for exit, a mechanism by which the wealthiest and most powerful can detach themselves from the American Republic while continuing to extract value from it. This is not speculation. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is people doing things in public, writing books about it, running training programs, and staffing the federal government with their acolytes. And what do they want this exit for? They want it so that you cannot tell them what to do. They do not want you, the citizen, the voter, the participant in democratic self-government, telling them they cannot feed toxic lies into your children's brains through algorithms optimized for engagement. They do not want you telling them they must pay taxes on their wealth. They do not want you telling them they cannot pollute, cannot exploit, cannot accumulate without limit. They want to turn their capital into a dominion. They want a world where money is the source of sovereignty, where the billionaire is the king and the rest of us are subjects whose role is to labor and consume and never ever make demands. Never that. They call it freedom. They mean freedom for themselves. They mean your subjugation. You must understand this. It's important. There are two kinds of people in this movement. The cynical are the architects, the Srinivasans and the Teals, the men who built the ideology, who wrote the books, who ran the boot camps, who renounced their citizenship and relocated to Singapore. They know exactly what they are doing. They believe they are building a better world, better for themselves at least. They have a theory of history, and they are executing it with precision. The craven are the fellow travelers, the tech VCs like Jason Calacanis, who post about founder mode Trump while claiming to oppose ICE cruelty, as if the cruelty were separate from the project, as if they did not fund it, as if their hands were clean. The venture capitalists who attended the parties nodded along and told themselves it was just ideas, just speculation, just the kind of thing smart people talk about over expensive wine. The cynical built the machine. The craven provided the capital and the cover. Both are culpable. Both have blood on their hands. Because here is where it ends, with Alex Pretty dying in the street. You may think these things are unconnected. The network state ideology, the boot camps in Singapore, the arcane theories of Rothbard and Hope and Smith. What do any of these have to do with a VA nurse being shot 10 times in the back in Minneapolis? Everything. They have everything to do with it. The men who shot Alex Pretty were instruments of a federal government that has been captured by this ideology. The administration they serve was funded by these people, staffed by these people, advised by these people. The cruelty is not incidental. The cruelty is the point. The cruelty is what happens when you build a movement around the idea that democratic constraints are illegitimate and the strong should dominate the weak. They wanted a state that would discipline labor, crush regulation, and enforce property rights with violence. They got it. They wanted a state that would be weak where they wanted weakness, unable to tax them, unable to regulate them, unable to hold them accountable, and strong where they wanted strength, strong enough to shoot a nurse trying to protect a woman, strong enough to occupy an American city, strong enough to demand voter databases as ransom. This is their utopia. This is what they built. This is what they paid for. And they were all willing to stand behind the men who shot Alex Pretty 10 times in the back to bring it about. I want you to remember their names. Not just the foot soldiers, not just the agents in mass, the architects, the funders, the theorists, the men who built the ideology, and the men who bankrolled its implementation. When this is over, and it will be over one way or another, there must be an accounting. Not revenge, accountability. A record of who did what and why, and what it cost. The names must be remembered. The connections must be documented. The blood must be traced back to the hands that spilled it. These people want to escape. That is their entire ideology. Exit, exit, exit. They want to take their money and go, to build their network states and their sovereign individual fantasies somewhere beyond the reach of justice. We must not let them. The American Republic is not a platform on which to sell wares in an unregulated abyss. It is not a legacy system to be disrupted. It is not an obstacle to be routed around. It is a covenant, a commitment, a thing that generations of Americans have fought and died to build and preserve. We have no need of their network states. We have no need of their digital feudalism. We have no need of their exit. What we need is accountability. What we need is justice. What we need is a republic that enforces its laws against the powerful as well as the weak. The cynical and the craven have shown us who they are. They have shown us what they want. They have shown us what they are willing to do to get it. Never forget who these people are. Never forget what they have done. Their hands are covered in blood. And that was The Crisis number 2 from Notes from the Circus by Mike Brock. It's a Substack that I am reading from based on Thomas Paine's 17 crises he wrote during the American Revolution. So that was The Crisis number 2 on the cynical and the craven. And now we will turn to The Crisis number 3 on the institution of the citizen. When we take power, and we will take power, we are going to have to do some uncomfortable things. I say this plainly because I am tired of pretending otherwise. The Republic is in crisis. The people who brought us to this crisis must be held accountable. And the conditions that allowed this crisis to occur must be changed fundamentally and permanently so that it never happens again. This will not be comfortable. It will not be polite. It will not satisfy those who believe that politics is a matter of splitting differences and finding common ground with people who have demonstrated beyond any reasonable doubt that they do not share our commitment to constitutional democracy. Some will call what I am about to describe authoritarian. They will call it indoctrination. They will say we have become what we opposed. They will be wrong, and I will explain why. The institution of the citizen is the largest institution in the Republic. I want you to sit with that sentence. I want you to understand what it means. We speak of institutions constantly: the presidency, the Congress, the courts, the military, the press. We analyze their health, their dysfunction, their capture by hostile forces. We write articles about institutional decay and institutional reform. We understand, at least in the abstract, that a republic is only as strong as its institutions. But we have forgotten the largest institution of all, the one that encompasses all the others, the one without which none of the others can function: the citizenship. The citizen. Citizenship is not a status. It is not a passport. It is not a set of rights you passively enjoy while going about your private business. Citizenship is an institution, the foundational institution of Republican government. And like all institutions, it must be built, maintained, renewed, and defended. An institution has norms. It has structure. It has practices. It has privileges, and it has responsibilities. The institution of the citizen is no different. To be a citizen is to occupy a role in the political order, a role that carries obligations as well as rights, duties as well as freedoms. We have forgotten this. We have allowed citizenship to decay into a consumer identity, a tribal marker, a thing you perform on social media rather than practice in your community. We have produced generations of Americans who do not understand what the Constitution requires, what self-governance demands, what they owe to each other and to the Republic that protects them all. And now we are paying the price. This is not an accident. This is the result of deliberate neglect. Thomas Jefferson understood that republics do not sustain themselves. That is why, in Virginia, he established public education as a civic necessity, not as a path to employment, not as a mechanism for economic mobility, as the means by which a self-governing people would learn to govern themselves. The founders knew that democracy was fragile. They knew that it required an informed and engaged citizenry. They knew that the alternative, a population ignorant of its rights and indifferent to its duties, was a population ripe for tyranny. For most of American history, we took this seriously. After World War II, we understood that the defeat of fascism abroad meant nothing if we did not fortify democracy at home. We built civic education into the bones of our public schools. We taught children explicitly and unapologetically that they were citizens of a self-governing republic, that fascism and totalitarianism were threats to human dignity, that democracy required their participation, that the Constitution was not just a historical document but a living compact that they were responsible for upholding. This was not neutral. This was not both sides. This was aggressively, intentionally, proudly pro-democratic. We were forming citizens. We were building the institution. And it worked. Then we stopped. We let civic education decay into an afterthought. We let citizenship become a brand. We convinced ourselves that democracy was self-sustaining, that the institutions would hold on their own, that we did not need to do the hard work of forming each generation in the practices and responsibilities of self-governance. The enemies of democracy did not make the same mistake. They built their own educational infrastructure, their think tanks, their media networks, their podcast and YouTube channels and boot camps. They taught their children that government was the enemy, that taxation was theft, that the collective good was a fiction, that the only loyalty was to oneself and one's capital. And now their children are in power, and our children do not know how to stop them. When we take power, we are going to fix this. We are going to rebuild civic education from the ground up. We are going to teach citizenship, real citizenship, with privileges and responsibilities to every child in America. We are going to make the institution of the citizen strong again, so that what is happening now can never happen again. I will tell you exactly what this means, because I am tired of speaking in abstractions. It means teaching children what the Constitution says and what it requires. Not as a historical curiosity, but as the operating system of their political life. The separation of powers, the Bill of Rights, the amendments that expanded the franchise and why they were necessary, the ways the document has been interpreted, contested, and defended over 2.5 centuries. It means teaching children what citizenship demands of them, not just their rights, their duties. The duty to be informed, the duty to participate, the duty to vote, to serve on juries, to engage in the life of their communities, the duty to hold their representatives accountable, the duty to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. It means teaching children to recognize the enemies of democracy, to understand how authoritarianism works, how it seduces, how it comes wrapped in flags and promising to make things great again, to recognize propaganda, to identify manipulation. To resist the siren song of strong men who promise simple solutions to complex problems. It means teaching children that they are part of something larger than themselves, that the Republic is a collective project, a covenant across generations, a thing that was built by people who came before and must be preserved for people who come after, that their individual freedom depends on collective institutions, and that those institutions depend on them. This is what Jefferson understood. This is what we understood after the war. This is what we forgot and what we must remember. They will call this indoctrination. Let them. All civic education is formation. All teaching of values is, in some sense, indoctrination. The question is not whether we form citizens, but what kind of citizens we form, and toward what end. The choice is not between indoctrination and neutrality. The choice is between forming citizens who understand and value democratic self-governance, and abandoning that formation to those who would teach them to despise it. We tried neutrality. We tried stepping back, letting the marketplace of ideas sort it out, trusting that democracy would defend itself. The result is a generation that cannot distinguish between news and propaganda, that thinks freedom means the absence of all obligation, that has been taught by algorithm to hate their neighbors and worship their exploiters. The marketplace of ideas has been cornered by people with more money than conscience. The neutral approach has produced a citizenry that does not know what citizenship means. We are done with neutrality. We are going to teach our children what democracy requires. We are going to form citizens who will defend the republic because they understand what it is and why it matters. We are going to be as aggressive and intentional in building democratic culture as the enemies of democracy have been in destroying it. And when conservatives call this liberal propaganda, we will say no. This is not liberal. This is not conservative. This is Republican with a small r. This is the inheritance of Jefferson and Madison and Lincoln and the soldiers who died at Normandy and the marchers who bled at Selma. This is the American tradition, and we are reclaiming it. There is more to Reconstruction than education. There are institutions to reform, laws to pass, accountability to impose. The architects and enablers of this crisis must face consequences. The structures that allowed a hostile minority to capture the government must be dismantled and rebuilt. But all of it, every reform, every law, every mechanism of accountability depends on the institution of the citizen. Laws mean nothing if citizens do not understand and enforce them. Reforms fail if the next generation does not know why they matter. Accountability is impossible if the people do not demand it. The citizen is the foundation. Everything else is built on top. If the foundation is weak, the structure collapses. If the foundation is strong, the structure can weather any storm. We are going to make the foundation strong. I know what you are thinking. You are thinking, this sounds good, but how? The other side controls the courts. They control half the legislatures. They will block everything. They will call it tyranny. They will resist with every tool they have. Yes, they will, and we will do it anyway. Here is what I have learned in this long year of crisis. The only things that happen are the things that people make happen. The only changes that occur are the changes that citizens demand. The system does not fix itself. The institutions do not heal on their own. Someone has to do the work. That someone is us. That someone is you. The protesters in Minneapolis did not wait for permission. They did not wait for the courts to save them or the Congress to act. They went into the streets in sub-zero cold, and they demanded that their government stop killing their neighbors. They made it happen. That is citizenship. That is the institution in action. That is what it looks like when the foundation is strong. We need more of that. We need it everywhere. We need citizens who understand that the republic is theirs, not the politicians, not the billionaires, not the theorists in their Singapore boot camps. Theirs, and who act accordingly. This pamphlet is called The Crisis, and I have been writing about crisis for 3 installments now. The danger, the enemies, the emergency. But crisis is not only danger. Crisis is also opportunity. The word comes from the Greek krisis, meaning decision, turning point, the moment when things could go either way. We are at that moment. The republic could fall, or the republic could be reborn, stronger than before, with a citizenry that understands what it almost lost and is determined never to lose it again. I believe in the second possibility. I believe it because I have seen what citizens can do when they decide to act. I have seen Minneapolis. I have seen the marches. I have seen ordinary people who never thought of themselves as political step into the street and demand their country back. That is the seed of Reconstruction. That is the beginning of renewal. That is the institution of the citizen remembering itself. The 250th anniversary of the American founding is 5 months away. On July 4, 2026, we will mark a quarter millennium of this experiment in self-governance. 250 years since a group of colonists declared that all men are created equal, that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, that when a government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. What will we have to show for ourselves on that day? I want us to arrive at that anniversary having kept the Republic. But more than that, I want us to arrive having rebuilt it, having remembered what citizenship means, having begun the long work of forming a generation that will never let this happen again. The institution of the citizen is the largest institution in the Republic, and this revolution, this peaceful, constitutional, democratic revolution, is about making that clear. We are going to teach our children what it means to be citizens. We are going to give them the knowledge and the tools and the will to defend their republic against all enemies. We are going to build an America where the cynical and the craven can never again get close to power. And we are going to do it together as citizens, as the institution that holds all other institutions in place. This is the crisis. This is the turning point. This is the decision. Let us decide well. And that is the end of crisis number 3 on the institution of the citizen. And now we'll go to the crisis number 4. On the uses of memory. Governor Tim Walz said there are children hiding at home in Minnesota, just like Anne Frank in Amsterdam. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum issued a statement in response, quote, Anne Frank was targeted and murdered solely because she was Jewish. Leaders making false equivalencies to her experience for political purposes is never acceptable. Despite tensions in Minneapolis, exploiting the Holocaust is deeply offensive. Close quote. What is Holocaust education for, if not this? I have read the diary of Anne Frank multiple times. The first was in middle school, where I wrote an essay on my impression of this girl's thoughts while she was hiding from the Nazis. I have returned to it since as an adult with different eyes, but the same essential response: awe at her clarity, grief at her fate, and gratitude that her words survived even though she did not. What strikes me most about Anne Frank's diary is its universalism. She did not write as a political theorist. She did not write to document the specific mechanisms of Nazi persecution. She wrote as a child, a human being, experiencing fear, boredom, hope, love, and the constant knowledge that powerful men wanted her dead for reasons she had not chosen and could not change. The diary endures because it is not merely a Jewish document, though it is that. It endures because it is a human document. It speaks to anyone who has ever been hunted, anyone who is hidden, anyone who has lived with the knowledge that the knock on the door could come at any moment. That is why we teach it to children. That is why it sits in middle school curricula across America. Not so students can memorize the specific history of Nazi Germany, though that matters, but so they can recognize the patterns, so they can feel in their bones what it means when a state decides that a category of people are outside the protection of law, so they understand that this can happen anywhere to anyone, and that they have a responsibility to prevent it. If that is not what the diary is for, then what is it for? A museum piece? A historical curiosity? A tragedy safely contained in the past, invoked only to remember and never to warn? The Holocaust Museum's statement performs a kind of protective custody over Anne Frank's memory. It says, "She was targeted because she was Jewish. Her experience belongs to Jewish history. You may not borrow it for other purposes." The Holocaust has been cheapened by careless comparisons. Every inconvenience is literally Hitler. Every policy dispute becomes Kristallnacht. There is a real danger in overuse, the boy who cried wolf, the analogy that loses all meaning. But there is also a danger in underuse, in building such a high wall around the Holocaust that its lessons become inaccessible, in declaring that the only valid invocation is the exact repetition, same victims, same perpetrators, same mechanisms, same outcome. Governor Walz did not say that ICE agents are Nazis. He did not say that the children of immigrants will be sent to gas chambers. He said there are children hiding at home in Minnesota, afraid of men with guns who want to take their parents away. And he said that their fear, the fear of a child in hiding, is something we have seen before. Is this so offensive? Is this so beyond the pale? The children hiding in Minnesota are not Jewish. The agents hunting their parents are not members of the SS. The end point, we pray, will not be extermination. But the experience, the terror of the knock on the door, the necessity of hiding, the knowledge that your family is not safe in your own home, that experience is not unique to Jewish history. It is a human experience. Anne Frank documented it with such clarity and power that her words have become the universal language for that particular kind of fear. To say that this language cannot be used, that these children's fear is categorically incomparable, that their hiding is a different species of hiding, is to betray the universalist legacy of the diary itself. I struggle to believe that Anne Frank would be offended by Governor Walz's invocation. I say this knowing it is presumptuous. I cannot know what Anne Frank would think. She was murdered at 15, and she left us only her words, words that have been interpreted and contested and claimed by countless people in the 8 decades since. But I have read those words. I have sat with them. What I find in them is not a narrow particularism, not a claim that her suffering was unique and incomparable, but an expansive humanity, a girl who saw clearly that what was happening to her was wrong, who believed that people were fundamentally good, who hoped that her words might matter to someone someday. Would that girl with her innocent morality, her desperate hope, her clear eyes, would she look at children hiding from ICE in Minneapolis and say, "Your fear is nothing like mine"? Would she say, "Do not invoke my name because your suffering is lesser, your terror less valid, your hiding less real"? She would not. She would recognize them. She would see herself in them because she understood, as only someone who has been hunted can understand, that the particular reasons for persecution matter less than the fact of persecution itself. That a child's fear is a child's fear. That hiding is hiding. That the knock on the door sounds the same in every language. The Holocaust Museum speaks of, quote, tensions in Minneapolis, close quote. Let me tell you about the tensions in Minneapolis. Federal agents have killed 2 people in less than 3 weeks. Renee Good was shot through the windshield of her car, point blank, in the face, while trying to drive away. Alex Pretty, an ICU nurse who cared for veterans at the VA hospital, was shot 10 times in the back while trying to protect a woman that agents had pushed to the ground. His phone was in his right hand. His other hand was raised above his head. 3,000 federal agents occupy the city. They wear masks. They operate without meaningful oversight. They deploy tear gas on crowds, including children. When local police try to secure crime scenes, they are ordered away. When courts rule against them, they arrest the same people the next morning. The Attorney General of the United States has sent a letter to Minnesota officials. ICE will leave if the state turns over its voter database. These are not tensions. This is an occupation. This is state violence deployed against an American city to extract political concessions. This is the thing that Anne Frank's diary is supposed to help us recognize. And the Holocaust Museum's response is to police the language of the governor who is trying to protect his people. There is a certain kind of intellectual who believes that analogies to the Holocaust are almost never appropriate, that the Holocaust was so unique, so unprecedented, so categorically different from all other atrocities, that comparison is itself a form of desecration. We have been listening to these intellectuals. We have been listening to them explain why we cannot call this fascism, why we cannot invoke the Gestapo, why Anne Frank's name must not be spoken in connection with children hiding from ICE. Their arguments are sophisticated. They invoke the specific history of Nazi Germany, the ideology of racial purity, the mechanized death camps, the 6 million. They note correctly that America in 2026 is not Germany in 1942. The camps are not built. The gas chambers do not exist. The end point, as yet, is not extermination. And therefore they conclude the comparison is invalid. The invocation is offensive. The analogy cheapens the memory of the dead. What this framework does in practice, it makes warning impossible. We cannot call it fascism until the fascism is complete. We cannot invoke the Gestapo until the camps are built. We cannot compare to Anne Frank until children are being loaded onto trains. By the time the analogy is permitted, it is no longer an analogy. It is simply a description of what has already happened. The warning function, The entire purpose of remembering has been disabled. The lesson of the Holocaust becomes we will recognize the next Holocaust only after it has occurred. And then we will build museums to it, and we will say never again, and we will wait for the next one. This is not sophistication. This is not moral seriousness. This is a machine for generating reasons not to act. On the most recent episode of the Fifth Column, Michael Moynihan argues that the problem with invoking Nazis is that it empowers people to punch Nazis. And when you broaden the definition of Nazi, you open the door to violence against people who merely have shitty ideas. This is his concern. This is what keeps him up at night. Not the federal agents killing people in Minneapolis, the hypothetical future violence that might be committed by people who take the Nazi comparison too seriously. Moynihan is not worried about the violence being done by the state right now. He is not worried about Renee Good shot through her windshield. He is not worried about Alex Preddy shot 10 times in the back. He is worried about the hypothetical future violence that might be done by people who take the Nazi comparison too seriously. The actual bodies are less concerning than the theoretical bodies. The violence of the state is less alarming than the violence of those who might resist it. This is the tell. This is how you know the concern is not really about protecting the memory of the Holocaust. It is about protecting the comfort of people who do not want to be implicated, who do not want to face the possibility that they are living through something that demands more of them than commentary. We have also been told that we should criticize the administration's tactics without reaching for historical analogies. Call it authoritarian, call it police-state tactics, but do not invoke the specific history of fascism, because that history is contested and complicated, and we might get the taxonomy wrong. But notice, when someone calls the administration's tactics Chavista or KGB-like, there is no outcry. When someone invokes Orban or Erdogan, the Holocaust Museum does not issue a statement. It is only the Nazi comparison, the one with the most moral weight, the one that most clearly demands action, that must be policed with such vigor. This is not about historical accuracy. This is about moral deflection. The insistence on finding the exactly correct authoritarian analogy is a way of not reckoning with what is happening. It transforms an emergency into a seminar. It replaces action with taxonomy. The house is on fire, and they are arguing about the chemical composition of the accelerant. This is a show hosted by Camellie Foster, Matt Welch, and Michael Moynihan, journalists and commentators who position themselves as heterodox thinkers, skeptical of both left and right, committed to reason and nuance in an age of hysteria. They are, by their own account, the adults in the room. I've listened to their recent episode on Minneapolis. I have listened to Moynihan scold Governor Walz for the Anne Frank comparison. I have listened to him explain, at considerable length, why we cannot call this fascism, why the Gestapo analogy is offensive, why Jonathan Roach, a writer they claim to greatly respect, is wrong in his Atlantic piece arguing that yes, it is time to use the word. And I have listened to them pivot almost seamlessly from policing the language of resistance to criticizing Walz for not having a productive conversation with Trump sooner. As if the problem in Minneapolis is insufficient diplomacy. As if 2 people died because the governor didn't pick up the phone. I was told some time ago that I was considered too confrontational to be a guest on the fifth column. I found this interesting. Not because I was offended, I was not, but because it revealed something about the show's function in the epistemic ecosystem. The fifth column is a permission structure. It gives its audience, educated, politically engaged, generally centered to libertarian, permission to not take sides, permission to see both sides as equally captured by hysteria, permission to believe that the real danger is overreaction, not the thing being reacted to, permission to feel sophisticated while doing nothing. When Trumpistan does something monstrous, the fifth column finds the nuance. They interview historians about the precise definition of fascism. They debate whether the correct analogy is Mussolini or Chavez or Orban. They express concerns, raise questions, and ultimately conclude that the people sounding alarms are being hysterical. When the left does something the hosts find distasteful, a protest that gets out of hand, a university speech code, a clumsy statement by a progressive politician, the show focuses in. The nuance disappears. The judgment is clear. The detachment is just so glaring. The inability to step out of this frame of false neutrality. The show exists to make a certain kind of person feel good about their disengagement. It tells them, you are not ignoring an emergency. You are refusing to be manipulated by those who cry wolf. You are the reasonable one. The hysterics are the problem. I am too confrontational for this show because I refuse to participate in the permission structure. I insist on naming what is happening. I decline to treat the occupation of Minneapolis as an occasion for seminars on comparative authoritarianism. When federal agents shoot a VA nurse 10 times in the back, the correct response is not to ask whether the analogy to historical fascism is precisely calibrated. Moynihan constructs his moral framework around capacity rather than intention. We cannot call it fascism, he argues, because the full apparatus of fascism has not yet been constructed. The camps are not built. The courts still sometimes restrain. Therefore, the comparison is premature. If one cannot deploy apt historical analogy as a cautionary tale of where things might lead if certain actions are not taken because it risks evoking an emotional response in the public, then what even is the point of learning history? You cannot warn about a fire until the house is burned down. You cannot invoke the patterns of history until history has been fully repeated. The lesson of the Holocaust becomes, we will know it when we see the camps, and not a moment before. One could be mistaken for seeing this as apologetics. I do not think Moynihan sees himself as an apologist. He sees himself as a rigorous thinker, holding the line against rhetorical excess, refusing to let emotion cloud analysis. The problem is that this rigor is selectively applied. The same show that demands precise historical taxonomy before we may call something fascism does not demand the same precision before calling campus protesters woke mobs. The same hosts who police the invocation of Anne Frank do not police the invocation of cancel culture or left-wing authoritarianism. The rigor points one direction. The skepticism flows one way. And the effect, whatever the intention, is to provide cover for the side that is actually killing people. This is the role the fifth column plays in the epistemic ecosystem. Not as propagandists, they are too smart for that, too genuinely committed to their self-image as independent thinkers, but as the reasonable voice that tells you the alarmists are wrong, as a sophisticated take that lets you feel good about not taking to the streets, as the permission structure for inaction, dressed up in the language of nuance. I am too confrontational for their show. I will accept that as a compliment. The memory of the Holocaust belongs to everyone, not because everyone suffered it, they did not, but because the lesson is universal. The lesson is this. This is what happens when a state decides that a category of people are outside the protection of law. This is what happens when good people do nothing. This is what happens when we wait too long to name the thing. Anne Frank's diary is taught in middle schools because we want children to recognize the patterns, to understand that the particular identity of the victim does not diminish the crime, to feel in their bones what it means to be hunted, so that when they see hunting, they will not look away. Children are hiding in Minnesota right now, not from the SS, from ICE, not because they are Jewish, because their parents came from somewhere else. The reasons are different. The fear is the same. Governor Walz was right to invoke Anne Frank, not because the situations are identical, they are not, but because the situations rhyme, because the pattern is visible, because the lesson of the diary is precisely that we must see ourselves in the hunted, whoever they are, and act before it is too late. The Holocaust Museum's statement, whatever its intentions, functions as a permission slip for inaction. It tells people, this is not that. You do not need to be alarmed. The strong language is offensive, not the atrocity it describes. The intellectuals who police these comparisons, who insist that we cannot call it fascism, cannot invoke the Gestapo, cannot speak of Anne Frank, are performing a kind of moral sophistication that is, in practice, indistinguishable from complicity. They are building a wall around the lessons of history so high that those lessons become unusable. They are ensuring that never again means only never again to those specific people in that specific way, and therefore, functionally, means nothing at all. Anne Frank died at Bergen-Belsen in February 1945. She was 15 years old. The camp was liberated by British soldiers a few weeks later. She did not live to see her diary published. She did not live to see it become one of the most widely read books in the world. She did not live to see generations of school children write essays about her, as I once did, trying to understand what it felt like to be hunted. But she hoped for it. In her diary, she wrote about wanting to be a writer, about wanting her words to live on, about believing that what she was experiencing mattered, not just to her, not just to Jewish history, but to the human record. She gave us a gift, the gift of her witness, the gift of her clarity, the gift of knowing, through her words, what it feels like to be a child hiding from men who want to kill her. We honor that gift not by locking it away, not by building walls around it, not by declaring that it belongs to one people and one history and cannot be shared. We honor it by using it, by letting it illuminate the present, by recognizing when we see children hiding that we have seen this before, that we know what it means, that we know what it demands of us. Anne Frank cannot speak for herself. She was silenced at 15 in a camp in Germany, surrounded by death. But her words speak. They have never stopped speaking. And what they say to anyone with ears to hear is, see me. See what happened to me. And when you see it happening again, to anyone, anywhere, for any reason, do not look away. There are children hiding in Minnesota. Their crime is being the children of immigrants. Their punishment is fear. Their fate is not yet written. We know what this is. We have been taught to recognize it. We have read the diary. We have visited the museums. We have said the words, never again. Now we will find out if we meant them. And that is the end of the crisis number 4. We'll continue next Friday, 12:30, right here on AM 970 and Facebook with the crisis number 5. Again, I'm reading from a series of pamphlets, we might say, even in this day of the internet and electronic media, modeled on Thomas Paine's 17 crisis pamphlets that he wrote during the American Revolution. This is from a Substack called Notes from the Circus, written by Mike Brock. Highly recommend it. If you aren't subscribed to his Substack, it's free. There's no paywall. You should definitely subscribe. And so we will close today with the crisis number 4, and we'll pick up again next Friday, 12:30, right here on 970 AM with crisis number 5. That's all I got for you today. I hope you found this special project, the initiation of this special project, interesting and helpful. As I said in the introduction to the series, we cannot go back to the way things were. Babylon must fall. We must go forward. And I am of the opinion that these 17 modern day crisis pamphlets will give us all the tools we need for focusing our awareness on the new island, country, and world that we want to manifest. So until next Friday, I will bid you all adieu. Remember to get outside, get into nature, get your feet in the sand, get your arms around a tree. The energy field of nature is required for human beings. Love you all. And stay tuned for Tanika Knowles coming up next on Dreamcatchers. This has been Ray Bratcher, Children of the Sun. You guys have a great weekend. I am out of here.